Hi, I'm Laura Briggs with Fantini Research, and I'm here with Michael Pollock of Spectrum Gaming. Spectrum is the co-host of our Public Policy Insights series, and today Mike and I are talking about distributed gaming. Mike, you've been doing a lot of research in this area. What are your thoughts on this as a growing sector of the industry?
Well, Laura, it is an increasingly important sector that legislators and regulators and other policy stakeholders need to be aware of uh, throughout the coming months and years. Distributed gaming is effectively designed as the distribution of gaming devices outside of a casino environment. So it's slot machines at truck stops and other designated areas. And it's problematic in certain senses. For example, um, much of it as it moves forward is there's different segments of distributed gaming. The one I want to focus on is essentially the unregulated
Hmm.
segment. And that is a sense by definition means forms of distributed gaming, particularly slot machines, that are distributed in retail outlets, gas stations, convenience stores, bars, restaurants, and so forth. And they're not licensed, a licensing authority. They're not tested. At least there's no requirement they be tested by a GLI, for example.
Mhm.
There's no other forms of regulation. They don't have to adhere to responsible gaming practices and so forth. So they are a form of gaming, very much a form of gaming that's outside the realm of regulation, which is the world in which you and I and most of the industry that reads the Fantini report and watches these segments is concerned with.
Right.
And that has significant implications for the industry and significant concerns, legitimate concerns. And amongst these concerns are the very real fact that they are slot machines. By any reasonable measure, they are slot machines. They accept money, you take chances, and they distribute money. Some of them endeavor to offer some level of skill, but that's questionable, and that is also not something that is decisive in what they are and what they can do.
So these are the types of games that the argument for them not being gambling is they have a pre-reveal feature or they have some kind of skill feature where they can, nudge it or bump up to the next level or something along those lines.
There may be something along those lines but our research says that those features are not particularly decisive in terms of their impact on the legal regulated, gaming market.
Right.
And I say that
overall, they're still chance machines.
Well, that's the point. Yes, the ones that I'm familiar with and have looked at, they're not in any sense pure skill.
Okay.
There are random number generators within these machines that do obviously create a certain significant level of randomness and chance. So having said all that, the questions are, do they cannibalize licensed regulated casino gaming? And the answer is yes. By definition, they do. And we've seen this even in the licensed regulated distributed gaming market, such as in Illinois, where the distributed games are licensed, are authorized, are regulated, are tested. But it's clear, and it's commonly accepted, that they are more convenient. Many people live closer to them than they do to a casino, and they do cannibalize. And it's particularly problematic where they're not licensed, because there's no controls over how many there are, where they're located. In certain states, like Pennsylvania, for example, there's an estimated at least 15,000 of these machines distributed throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Wow.
That's the equivalent of, let's say, 5 casinos.
Yeah.
So, but here's the important point that is often missed. is that the way the licensed regulated gaming industry has evolved in the United States has been under the premise, the accepted premise, the widely accepted premise, the correct premise. Gaming license is a privilege. You earn that privilege by your demonstration of your good character, honesty, your integrity, your business ability. And in return for it, you earn that, and you apply for a license, and you get that license. And the state, the granting authority, the governing authority, in return for you having earned that privilege, giving you that license, gives you certain benefits. There are limits as to the number of licenses, the locations. You have protection that other industries don't have. That's the give and take as to how it works. So when you superimpose onto that an unregulated segment of the gaming industry, which is what we're talking about here, that changes that relationship. And not only would these machines cannibalize, in our research, would cannibalize the existing, gaming industry, largely because of their convenience, but it also hurts the value of the license. The value of that license was dependent on the original agreement with the state. There's going to be a certain number of licenses that are going to be issued, and that's a predictor of what the value of that license is. If you diminish the value of that license, it damages public policy in general. That licensee is going to be less willing and less able to invest more capital in their facilities. The cost of capital is going up. The license is worth less.
Yeah.
That translates into a lot of issues that states need to be aware of. Policymakers need to be aware of. It might mean less employment overall. It might mean less capital invested, less non-gaming investments being made. So these are issues that states in particular need to be aware of, because on one level, there's a sense, it's a very real sense, that these games are there, and sometimes they're in the form of, let's say, charitable gaming and distributed in fraternal organizations, by way of example. They're there, so why not just tax them and let them participate in the gaming industry? But here's the important point, Laura, is that taxation does not equate to regulation.
Right. They need to have rules in place for consumer protection and such.
They have to adhere to those rules, and not just consumer protection, that's an important part of it, but it's also how many machines can they have? Where can they be located? If you have a situation where they can be anywhere, it just flies in the face of and damages the basic structure of effective regulation.
Yeah, very good point. What would you say to state policymakers who are considering one or the other? Maybe they don't have casinos yet, but they're considering whether distributed gaming or casinos would be the way to go.
Well, my advice to them would be that if you have distributed gaming in advance of casinos, you're less likely to attract and profitable, thoughtful, experienced casino operators. They're not going to want to enter a market where the competition is already there. The playing field is not level, no matter how you look at it. It's an unlevel playing field. So whichever comes first, the playing field is going to not be level. So distributed gaming is problematic. And I would also raise the point that, and I've said this in many forums and in many different ways, authorization of gaming in any form, the legal authorization of gaming, is a long-term solution. It's a long-term issue. It's going to be the decisions you make to authorize and or expand will have implications and effects for decades, generations. Gaming is not a way to solve this year's fiscal problem. It doesn't work that way.
Very good point. Certain states such as Illinois and, well, I'm not sure Illinois is the best example because there's controversy there. due to, the cannibalization of the casino industry there. But how about a state like Nevada, where gaming is just everywhere? Does it work there because it's just a gaming state and it's, tourism is
I'm not, yeah,
so heavy there?
I'm not saying distributed gaming can't work effectively. There are
Mhm.
states where it has been and can work effectively, but it has to be planned properly. You have to know in advance how it's going to function. So Nevada is obviously a great example, not the only example, but it's a great example as to how distributed gaming has been around for a long time.
Mhm.
But there's so many different market segments, and that's one thing a state needs to be aware of, and the licensees within that state need to be aware of. So the tourists that play, let's say, on the strip, are not going to be impacted by distributed gaming outside, or and there's been slot machines at airports in Nevada for
Oh yeah.
probably as long as
Mhm.
air travel's been around, pretty close to it. So there are states. It's not our position is not anti-distributed gaming. It has to be thoughtful, and
Mhm.
you've got to take into account all the ramifications. You have to know what to expect going in.
Mhm. And for the states that have an existing unregulated industry, they're a step behind, I would think, in their policy making, since they've already got a problem that exists. Would you say that it would be in their best interest to address the unregulated market first and then decide whether or not to expand into a regulated market?
Well, I'm not sure who they is in that sense, but the states you're talking
I'm
about.
talking about the state, like a state like Missouri, Virginia, which actually I believe they're banning their skill games now. Pennsylvania, these states that have an existing gray market.
Yeah.
Is it in their
Well,
best interest to basically get rid of the gray market and then decide from there if they want to have some form of legal VLTs in internal
yes,
organizations?
sure, and yes, the answer to that is absolutely.
Yeah.
The key point, and again, this is what's missed, is that I'm going to reiterate that there's a sense out there that, well, regulate us, which really means tax us. And that's helpful, but it doesn't address some of the core issues
Mhm.
uh, that we focused on, including limiting the number and the location. Doing so in a thoughtful, clear method that does not hurt the ability or the willingness of casino operators to invest and expand.
Right. Yeah, I can see how that would make it a lot less attractive for a casino operator to come into a state with slot machines everywhere and pay millions of dollars for a license to open a property that they're going to dump another millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in, and then have gaming just everywhere. I can see how that would be an issue.
Gaming works when it's master planned and designed in a thoughtful way that takes into account all the stakeholders. And when you do it that way, and you take into account the plans and the impacts, you're going to have a much more robust and successful industry that advances public policy than if you just let the free market. Gaming's how gaming works in the United States, and it works well.
That's great advice. Do you have any closing remarks on distributed gaming?
I'm going to suggest that stay tuned, because it's a problem that cancel that. It's an issue that needs to be addressed by states, because if not addressed, particularly with respect to unregulated forms of distributed gaming that can expand anywhere, one of the problems would be that you can get to a point of critical mass, but it becomes much more difficult, if not impossible, to uproot it. So it's not a problem, it's not an issue that you can put on the back burner. It's got to be front and center in terms of what policymakers are focused on.
Okay, good advice. Well, we'll stay tuned and see what happens next, since there's several states that are dealing with this issue.
Thanks, Laura.
All right, thank you, Mike.